Welcome back to Paulie TV, everybody. I'm Paulie Malignaggi. Today we're going to be discussing how is boxing scored. It's debatable. It's really, sometimes it's subjective is the word really a lot, we hear used a lot when it comes to boxing scoring. Some things in some sports are subjective. Boxing scoring is based on now on the 10-point must system in modern day boxing. And it certainly is subjective. Now, what is a 10-point must system? It's automatic math here. You win a round, you got to get 10 points. Unless you got a point taken away from you, then you go 9, right? So if you win a round, but you lost a point, the loser always gets 9, which I don't know. I'm not sure I agree with this, but now it's so cemented in that it's hard to change that, right? The winner of a round gets 10, the loser of a round always gets 9, except that there's a knockdown or a point deducted, right? So it's hard to change that, even though people say, "Oh, should we give 10-8 rounds when there's no knockdowns and things of the such?" All you're gonna do if you do that, you're gonna create more subjectivity, and I think the subjectivity of all of this is what creates more problems and more disagreements. So while I kind of understand people saying, "Oh, we should change the 10-point must system to maybe a loser can get 8 or 7 points," I don't want to create more subjectivity in an already confusing scoring system. But the winner of a round gets 10 points. So automatically, the most points you can get in a 12-round fight is 120 points, right? But say you win a round by the criteria we discuss here, you lose a point in that round. Maybe you threw a headbutt, or you hit a guy when he was down and he had to get up. You say, oh, actually, maybe the guy slips and you hit him when he's down. Okay, well, you won the round. It becomes 9-9. What if I've seen the one confusion here: 2 knockdowns, 1 knockdown on the side of each side. I've seen people say, "Oh, that's 9-9." No, that's not 9-9. If each guy knocks each other down in a round, it's not 9-9, guys. It goes back to as if nobody got knocked down. It goes back to 10-point must scoring. You don't lose a extra point because of the knockdown. You lose a point because you won the round in the knockdown. If you didn't win the round in the knockdown, it goes back to the winner gets 10 points, the loser gets 9 points, unless there's somebody scored an extra knockdown over the other guy. So say each guy knocks each other down in a round. You score a 10-9 for whoever you think won the round. The knockdowns canceled each other out. It's still a 10-9 round. You win a round, but you lose a point. Like we said before, I was talking about before. 9-9. You lose a round and you lose a point. That puts you in some danger because now you lost a round by 2 points. So that puts you in a 10-8 situation. When you lose a point, it becomes all the more important to make sure you win that round because the difference is 2 points. I mean, it could be an even round, or you could have lost a round by 2 points. That can be a drastic change on an overall 12-round scorecard. So you got to be careful with that. And of course, the rest of it is self-explanatory. Like I said, 2 guys knocking each other down, we know that already. Points deducted. I don't know other hypotheticals, but the 10-point must scoring system, while it has its controversy, I believe if we end up adjusting it or changing it, we're going to create more subjectivity, and I really, really don't want to create more subjectivity in an already confusing scoring system. And a lot of times we see fights where certain judges have it completely for one guy and the other judge will have it completely for the other guy. And sometimes it's an outright ridiculous scorecard, and sometimes you can kind of see on the same page as both judges in some crazy ways, So how is boxing scored? I think the main things that people look for, or that at least they see in the criteria: punches landed, defense, effective aggressiveness, ring generalship, which again, that in itself is subjective. Ring generalship is subjective in itself, right? Somebody might say that guy's a real ring general, and another guy might look at the same guy and say, no, that guy's a runner. So when you've got a subjective scoring system and some of the criteria themselves are subjective, you're going to get some complicated scorecards at times and some complicated debates based on certain decisions. Judges are definitely human. They make errors. Sometimes they purposely make these errors, and sometimes, they just, they're having a bad night, or they just saw it a certain way. Again, subjectivity is part of the game. First things first, we'll talk about punches landed. In boxing today, we have these punch stats, these CompuBox systems. For me, they're an absolute waste of time because they're subject to human error, just like our own eyes are subject to human error. CompuBox and punch stats are not some kind of chip in the glove where you land a punch and there's automatically a clicker that hits. It's somebody watching one fighter, somebody watching the other fighter, and they're pressing buttons like they're playing Nintendo, essentially. And based on what they deem landed and what they deem didn't land, they hit the button. And so it'll click automatically based on that person's viewpoints of what landed and what didn't land. Now, for anybody that's watched a lot of boxing, we know sometimes it's subjective. if a punch really landed or not. Sometimes it'll partially land on the glove, and sometimes it'll partially land. Sometimes the guy will have his gloves up and he'll get hit with a combination. Did anything land? Did anything not land? Does he get credit for just getting off while the other guy didn't get off? Again, subjectivity. Personally, though, and when it comes to punches landed, I think we've all got to learn to trust our own eyes. We've seen some of these combi boxing punch stat statistics sometimes go crazy off the wall. I can remember my Adrian Broner fight, for example. The punch stats were ridiculous. And I can remember I actually got into the fight with the combi box guy like a few months before for criticizing his machine or his system on the air. And he was mad. Listen, I'm not trying to take food out of anybody's mouth, but I think they definitely ended up going against me in my subsequent fight, which was the Broner fight. I think they purposely weren't pressing buttons for me, and they were overpressing buttons for Broner. Nonetheless, that's just one example of many different times that we've seen the CompuBox punch stats being subjective to the person pressing the buttons. So if you consider yourself an educated boxing fan or an educated boxing viewer, you've got to probably learn to trust your own eyes and watch each round individually and know what's landing and what's not landing. And really, at the end of the day, you kind of know who's winning that round based on what you deem landed, and also based on what you deem the rest of the criteria, who dominated the rest of the criteria, which is defense. For me personally, my subjectivity here in the defense, for example, I remember there's a legend that says Willie Pep won a round without throwing a punch. I don't believe that's possible, because for me to get credit for defense, you also have to get credit for the return off of that defense. For me, the way you credit defense is, does a guy know how to not only make you miss, but does he know how to make you pay off of that defense? Does he know how to does he know how to counterpunch? Does he know how to set you up for traps based on making you reach or making you look for your own offense, making you miss, setting the table, taking it away from you in essence, like a bull in a matador, and then when you bite on it, you pay for it. For me, that's the kind of defense that you give credit for, my subjectivity, and when it comes in the defensive department. A guy who's just making a guy miss and not really making him pay, the attacker, the aggressive fighter has nothing to lose. When I would see a guy, or even when I would spar a guy who, was pretty slick and made me miss a lot, it always mattered if he was able to make me pay. And if he didn't make me pay, I started to take more chances, because I said, hey, what's the worst that can happen if I keep throwing at this guy? I'm going to miss. I'm not going to pay. But when a guy is able to counterpunch and hit you sharply, you end up, to talk about the master of this, Floyd Mayweather, why was he able to control the pace and deaden it? Because once you're able to make a guy pay anytime he misses, or most of the time that he's missing, you now make him gun shy. He doesn't want to throw anymore. He wants to make sure, he wants to be absolutely sure he's going to land, because he knows if he's not sure he's going to land, he might get punched in his own face because he missed. So automatically, to me, that kind of defense is what you credit. It's a defense it's fluid. That totally transports you from defense to offense in one fluid motion. And I think when it comes to the subjective matter of defense and scoring it, in terms of scoring a boxing round, you've got to score the kind of defense that makes a guy pay, makes a guy return and pay. Maybe you catch a few shots on your gloves, the guy gets off 3-4 punches, you block them, and you catch and shoot off the last shot. That's one way of making a guy pay off of your defense, right? He got off a nice combination. He didn't really land anybody. He landed on the gloves. You catch the last shot. You fire right back. You hit him. Okay, you know what? You've got the better of that exchange, even though he got off the more punches, right? Effectiveness, that's important. Also, effective aggressiveness. What is effective aggressiveness? It's the same thing now. The guy might be coming forward. Is he walking into counterpunches? If a guy is just running while the other guy's coming forward, they're both neutralizing each other because neither guy's getting an awful lot of punches. One guy because he can't catch the other guy because he's running and he's not making you pay. Okay, I give the round to the guy who's being aggressive, they cancel each other out. But if a guy's being aggressive and the other guy's landing the cleaner shots because of the guy's aggressiveness, now the guy who's in defensive mode is actually using those defensive traps to score the punches, right? To score shots. So in reality, the guy who's going backwards is winning the round. So I don't believe any of this BS about, you gotta be aggressive. You gotta win the last round. Now, you can win the last round by walking guys into shots, okay? Because punches landed for me is the biggest criteria. But when it comes to punches landed, that takes us back to the stats and all those statistical numbers that these networks love to throw in our face. Unfortunately, I've worked in other countries. I worked in England, for example, and for a long time, England did not have these CompuBox statistics, these computerized statistics, because, again, they didn't care for them because they're not definitive stats. I don't know about now, to tell you the truth, because I haven't worked in England a lot in the last couple of years due to this pandemic. So I'm not thinking off the top of my head if these stats are there or not. But I can remember them not being there, nobody caring. Because here's my opinion. American sports fans are brainwashed into thinking everything is with numbers. They don't know how to watch a sport without numbers. Baseball is the American pastime, right? Baseball, you can actually look at a game of baseball and judge it by numbers. They are definitive numbers. Batting average, hits. You know when a guy got a hit. He reached first base. The ball is either was tough to field in the infield or got to the outfield and he got on base. That's definitive. That's a hit. But it's not like boxing where the guy lands a shot and he definitely landed the shot. Did it land on the glove? How clean did it land? Did it land at all? Did he throw a bunch of punches and you can't tell in that exchange because the other guy was also throwing punches and you got to decide who landed what, and it was a quick exchange and you can't think about it for too long because they're continuing to box during that round. So you have to now kind of guess in that moment. The guy who's pressing the buttons is guessing just as much as you because he saw the same thing you saw, the same confusing thing you saw. So just because you couldn't figure it out, you're going to just let him figure it out for you? I don't believe in that. But I'll tell you what, boxing is one of those sports. It's difficult to understand, even for the layman, because it doesn't give you the same definitive number statistics like other sports do. And American sports fans are sort of brainwashed into going by the numbers. Everything goes by the numbers. And boxing is not one of those sports. Sure, you've got KOs and amount of wins and losses. Those are definitive numbers, right? But when it comes to other statistics with these punches landed, maybe punches thrown, I mean, how can you really mess that up, right? I mean, you can kind of, if you're counting how much punches the guy throws, I would hope you can get that right. But punches landed is super, super subjective. I mean, it's even for a guy who's pressing the buttons, it's not a definitive stat. It's just his take on what landed and what didn't. And if sometimes he might have had a couple of drinks, and he's not really seeing the fight so good. Or maybe he didn't sleep so good the night before. Or maybe he's distracted or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Listen, I've seen some crazy numbers with punch stat statistics. I remember watching Danny Garcia versus Mauricio Herrera. And they had Garcia landing more shots, but Herrera landing more jabs. Garcia didn't land anything. I don't think he landed anything that night. You know what I'm saying? Like, just because Garcia is the harder puncher doesn't mean he's landing more power punches, But I remember the overall punches were for Herrera, and I remember the power punches were for Garcia, and I agreed with neither, and I thought it was very clear that neither one was right? I thought in both statistics Herrera had outlanded him in every way. Garcia got the decision regardless, which was controversial at the time, but I remember that was off the top of my head a fight where the numbers didn't add up. I get a lot of slack for my fight with Pablo Cano, and I can remember. There was the statistics were heavily in his favor, and I think it affected the way people were judging the fight. I can remember through 8 rounds of that fight. I mean, I'm a guy who cut pretty easily, if you guys remember my career, bruised pretty easily, if you guys remember my career. I can remember through about 8 rounds of that fight, being in the corner and thinking like, wow, this guy barely touched me tonight. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can look at my face. I mean, there's barely a mark on me. He looked like he went through a windmill already, but I hadn't been touched. Now, in the last 4 rounds, I remember it got kind of complicated for me. I kind of tired out. I think I overtrained in that training camp. Regardless, Conor was a capable guy, and he dropped me in the 11th round, and it ended up making for a close fight. But I remember thinking about seeing the statistics afterwards. I was wondering, why were people thinking I lost that fight? Well, usually if I was in a close fight, I can remember, for example, my fight with Herman Ngujo or my second fight with Love Morendo when my hair was all over the place and my hands were broken. Even my first fight with Juan Diaz where I thought I won. My fight with Adrian Broner where I thought I won. I remember thinking in those fights, they're all close. Like, this is going to come down to the wire here. The Pablo Cano fight, I kid you not, I never once thought that fight was in jeopardy. Even my corner, if you look at my corner, I mean, they were all relaxed. Everybody was relaxed. My management team was on the first row. I remember looking at them in the corner, and they were totally relaxed. It was like everybody else was in a different reality, and we were just cool. And like I said, usually when I'm in the fight itself, I can kind of tell when something's in jeopardy. I did realize late in the fight he was catching up, but I just felt like I was so far ahead, it wasn't going to matter. As a matter of fact, when I get dropped in the Pablo Cano fight, if you look at my reaction, I go like this to the crowd. What I'm telling them is, don't get too crazy. I'm fine. He's way behind on the scorecards. He's not going to win this fight. You know what I mean? So I'm getting up like, relax. He's got to knock me out, and he's not going to knock me out. That was my reaction. That's why I got up like, and I went like this. If you look at that knockdown for that fight, when I got up, if you notice my reaction. Nonetheless, regardless of what you think of the decision, I had a problem with the punch stats, and then of course I had a problem with the Broner fight punch stats as well, and I've had a problem with certain other fights in general, not mine, that were with the punch stats. So I'll tell you what, when it comes to scoring a fight, punches landed is a big criteria, but you've got to actually watch the fight. You can't not have watched the fight and then watch SportsCenter or watch your local news and they show the punch stats, because let's face it, bro, the media always makes us dumber. Whether it's politics, sports, or anything, media always makes us dumber if we listen to them. So you go by the punch stat statistics, and you didn't watch the fight, you're going to let it automatically affect you. You got to watch the fight yourself. You've got to judge for yourself what's landing and what's not, on top of course, being able to judge the other criteria. An educated mind, an educated eye, an educated boxing fan, I think will understand what I'm saying. Regardless, guys, it's always going to be subjective. So there are times where we're just not going to agree. You guys may not always agree with each other, not going to agree with me. I may not agree with you. Regardless, that's part of the subjectivity end of it. But I think if we get some more consistency as to what is effective aggressiveness, what is effective defense, what is effective punches landing, clear punches landing, I think if we can get down to the nitty-gritty of those things, then at least we make the criteria a bit stronger, and maybe we can disagree a little bit less. And that's my take on scoring in boxing. Like, subscribe, give me your comments, because I know we're going to have comments all over the place for this video.